If you're following along in the program at your seats, I'm not Dean Molly Burke. My name is Matt Quilty. I'm the Assistant Dean in the Brennan School of Business at Dominican University. Thank all of you for coming tonight. For our ninth annual Ethics and Leadership Lecture, this is organized by our Christopher Chair in Business Ethics. Tonight it's our privilege to welcome a truly international leader in both the corporate and nonprofit world, Dr. Carolyn Wu. Dr. Wu is President and CEO of Catholic Relief Services, the official international humanitarian agency of the Catholic Church in the United States. CRS is one of the world's largest and most respected international relief and development programs, reaching more than 130 million people in nearly 100 countries each year. Dr. Wu serves on the boards of several leading corporations and nonprofits, and is very familiar with the world of higher education, especially business education, having served as dean at the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame prior to leading CRS. More about Dr. Wu in one moment. This year, the Brennan School of Business is celebrating its 35th anniversary. This annual Ethics and Leadership Lecture is one of our signature events, and it's an important complement to the business education that we provide to our students. The opportunity to hear from and engage with leaders such as Carolyn Wu, and you can see the list in your program of our past speakers, continues the legacy of Ed and Lois Brennan, for whom our school is named. I want to especially acknowledge a special friend of Dominican and the Brennan School for making tonight possible, Ms. Doris Christopher. You may know Doris Christopher as the entrepreneur who started The Pampered Chef. She also established the Brennan School's Doris K. and J.W. Christopher Chair in Business Ethics, which supports this annual lecture. Doris is unfortunately unable to join us tonight, but she sends her regrets. Now I'd like to welcome Elizabeth Collier, Associate Professor in the Brennan School and Co-Director of our Center for Global Peace Through Commerce, to introduce Dr. Wu.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, everyone. My name is Liz Collier, and I teach business ethics and corporate social responsibility and lead with Kathleen Odell, an economist, the Center for Global Peace Through Commerce at Dominican. The Center for Global Peace Through Commerce actually owes a debt to Carolyn Wu for sort of coining that phrase and trying to move business in that direction in a lot of the work that she has done. I'm here to introduce Dr. Wu this evening. We're so excited to have her here. Dr. Wu was born and raised in Hong Kong. She was educated by the Maryknoll Sisters for 12 years before immigrating to the U.S. to attend Purdue University. At Purdue, she majored in economics, earned her master's degree in industrial administration, and ultimately completed her PhD in strategic management. After joining the faculty and later the administration at Purdue, she went on to serve as the dean of the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame. Her background in strategic planning, combined with a strong sense of leadership and vision, has been a tremendous asset for the organizations that she serves. During her tenure at Notre Dame, the Mendoza College was frequently recognized for the strengths of its ethics education and its undergraduate business program. Dr. Wu was one of the first lay members of the Board of Catholic Relief Services and threw herself into the agency's work, traveling the world to witness the need facing so many and the response that was delivered by Catholic Relief Services. She subsequently led a task force of the premier accreditation body for business schools to examine the role of business in fostering peace, and she helped launch the Principles for Responsible Management Education for the United Nations Global Compact. And the Brennan School of Business is very active in the Global Compact and in the Principles for Responsible Management Education in our curriculum. Dr. Wu currently serves on the board of several organizations, including AON, NISOURCE, and Catholic Charities USA, to name just a few, and she has received numerous awards for her work. Earlier this year, she was named one of the 500 most powerful people on the planet by Foreign Policy magazine, and one of only 33 in the category of a force for good. It's my pleasure this evening to present Dr. Wu.
You have seen part of my presentation. We could shorten it with the PowerPoint. Let's just bring it back to wherever it was. Yeah, Matt is the person who does all of these things.
Multiple skills.
Before I get into my presentation, it's just a tremendous privilege to be here. The Dominican University does such great things, but of course I am biased because I'm also trained in a way by the Dominicans. The Maryknoll sisters, when they started, every order has to have like a mentor, religious order. And the group that mentored the Maryknoll sisters were the Dominican sisters. And in fact, the Maryknoll sisters are known as the Maryknoll sisters of the Dominicans. So, I mean, it's like being home again. So I just want to say thank you very much. And to Liz and to Matt and to the Brennan School, which took on this whole initiative, which is Principles for Responsible Management Education under the UN Global Compact, which is too long to tell you about, but it's an incredible initiative that really allows students, business students, to understand the good that they could do in the world. I know that we've had a lot of scandals and so on in business, and people usually cite all the bad stories about business. But I just want to say business is a necessary good. It is not a necessary evil. And even our encyclicals, Caritas in Veritate and Sanctissimus Annus by Pope John Paul II, both mention the good that can be done in free markets and in business, but the difference is that it depends on the moral energies of the leaders. So it's not business which is good or bad, it's really the people who run them. And because of the incredible impact of business, it's important to train our leaders well. So my hat's off to the Brennan School for the work that they're doing. I just also want to say, in general, I mean, these awards that you receive are a little bit embarrassing. They're far from perfect. But I want to talk a little bit about this award because it doesn't go to me, which is the recognition by Foreign Policy Magazine, which is the foreign policy magazine. And it identified 500 most powerful people, and I was listed. But clearly, I've only been with CRS for just about a year when they compiled it. So it's not about me, it's not about my work, but it's about the work of Catholic Relief Services. And most important, that is really about the work of the American Catholics. Wherever we go in the world, people may or may not even be able to pronounce our name, Catholic Relief Services. They just say, those are the American Catholics. So that award actually goes to the American Catholics for the work that you have been doing and supporting on behalf of our agency and on behalf of the Bishops' Conference in the world to be in the most difficult and the poorest places. So I just want to say this award actually is an award that goes to the Catholic Church in the United States. Tonight's topic, and I think this year's theme for Dominican, is on global citizenship. So that fits very well with the work that we're doing at CRS. And I just say for myself, upon my reflection, I've actually been very much a product of globalization. I mean, I'm Chinese. I was born in Hong Kong to parents who had to immigrate from China when the communist revolution took over. My father himself was educated in Scotland. My mother never went to school. She was tutored in-house. We lived in Hong Kong, which was a British colony, and 97% of the people are Chinese, but the official language of Hong Kong was English. I was educated by American nuns who left home to do the education, and they were missionaries. So I'm a product of a missionary education, and now I come back to the missions. I did my higher education at Purdue University in the United States, where it gave me funding for all my 3 degrees for 6 out of 7 years. So I was the beneficiary of very generous Americans. Eventually, I worked at Notre Dame, which is known as the Fighting Irish, but is actually founded by French priests. And today I represent the U.S. Catholic Church to go out into the world. So you talk about globalization. I'm sure many of you could cite similar stories if you combine all the strands of what does it mean to come from a global context and be a global citizen. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about CRS and our work in the world. CRS is founded in 1943, so we are 70 years old. We were founded during the Second World War to bring refugees out of Eastern Europe. There's actually quite a number of Lithuanians and Polish people in the Chicago area who came to relocate to the United States through CRS. Many people think that we are Catholic charities. People say we've given money to your organization, but they've given it to Catholic charities. We are not Catholic charities. It is a wonderful sister organization. Father Larry is a good friend. But Catholic Charities is charged to do work in the United States. And Catholic Relief Services is charged to do humanitarian work overseas, and overseas only. So next time when people say we're Catholic charities, you can tell them, no, you're not correct. And we are part of a big family. When we talk about the global church, it's not just a big term. There's a lot of ways that it is real. And for us, everywhere we go in the world, we see the church there. There are brothers and sisters and partners in our work. In total, there are 164 organizations like CRS and Catholic Charities. In most countries, they combine the domestic humanitarian work with the international work. So just think about it. We belong to a family where there are 163 other members. We are the largest in the world except for Germany. In Germany, they count all of the hospitals and Catholic higher education and primary education as Caritas. But otherwise, we will be the largest in this network. We work with a lot of local partners. In total, we work in about 100 countries, and we have about 5,000 people, 4,600 of them are overseas. So, on average, we have 40 to 50 people per country, and that's a very small staff because the work that we do is very labor intensive. So we work with a lot of partner organizations. We work with over 1,100 partner organizations, and half of those are Catholic organizations around the world, which means that about half of our funding flows through the Catholic organizations, and in that process, we are also building up the capacity of the local church. Our mission is very simple. It derives directly from the gospel. When Christ told us that there's a preferential option for the poor, that we have to attend to our brothers and sisters, and particularly those who are poor. Our mission is as simple as that. It's to take God's love anywhere in the world where there is need. We don't serve on the basis of creed. We don't serve only Catholics. We serve whenever there is a need. We serve because we are Catholics, not because others are Catholics. So in the 100 countries that we're in places such as Afghanistan and Pakistan. We're actually doing a lot of work right now for Syrian refugees. In the Middle East, we're in Jerusalem, we're in the West Bank, and we're in Gaza. So we are in places wherever there's conflict, in very fragile countries and in very poor countries. We also, people know us for our international work. We also actually have a U.S. operations, and our U.S. operations is not so much to deliver services to the poor, as I said, that's Catholic Charities, but our U.S. operations is to educate and inspire the U.S. Church so that the work we have been doing in your name, so that you could be aware of it, to let people know that while we're not perfect, the church is not perfect, but the church is sincere in living out the gospel message, and that's what we've been trying to do. This is just give you a sense of our operations. Anywhere in the map which has color represents the areas that we operate in. We come and go in different countries depending on the needs. There are countries now which are much more wealthy, and we leave. So, for example, we're hardly in Eastern Europe anymore. but you can see we're almost in every country in Africa. So we cover anywhere between 90 to 100 countries. We come and go. Our situations tend to be pretty fluid, depending on political situations and emergency. We serve about 100 to 130 million people a year. Our budget can range from anywhere around $700 to $950 million. A third of our work is still in emergency. You may not hear about them, like Haiti or tsunami. Those are highly publicized emergencies, but there's a lot of emergencies around the world. There's flooding, there's earthquakes. There's just been a couple of earthquakes in Pakistan. There's hunger, there's displaced people because of political conflict. Otherwise, we work pretty comprehensively in about 10 or so programming sectors that include shelter, education, water, sanitation, microfinance, and peace building, for example. So that gives you some sense of the agency which is doing work in your name. I know a lot of times when we talk about relief, we talk about, the problems around the world, people have this feeling, we never solve anything. We only hear about problems, and the problems just persist. Where is the good news? So it is very important, this particular overhead, is to show that we've had significant progress. It's not just the work of CRS, it's the work of the humanitarian community over the last 30 years. And I want to show that if we work hard at our problems, if we take ownership for some of these issues, we do make progress. So, for example, the children who are dying under 5 years of age have gone from 12 million people a year to 7 million. So it's a reduction of 5 million children, which is a big number. We still have problems because we still have 7 million children under 5 years old who die every year. But a reduction of 5 million is not something that we should also ignore. If you look at the middle lower chart, the percentage of girls in sub-Saharan Africa now who go to school has gone from about 43% to 97% in the last 30 years. And I just want to say, clearly, the quality of their education may not be high, but at least most girls have some exposure to about the 3rd grade level in terms of literacy. They could at least know numbers, be able to comprehend simple concepts, a little bit of reading, and that goes a very long way. Upper left to you is about the availability of water, that now 2 billion people in the world have access to water who before now didn't. And there's still about 1 billion people who don't. So you can read some of these actually on our website. I don't want to go over all of those, but to give you a sense, there are significant, meaningful progress which has been made. So in some places, people are trying to eradicate malaria, for example. We know that guinea worm has largely been eradicated, and I read up about it, and it's a pretty terrible disease. I also want to say the type of progress which has been made in the world is not just about mortality rate or education rate, that we also need progress in governance, particularly on a topic like global citizenship. We see some progress. By the way, progress is not linear. And it doesn't mean that progress once made would not roll back. There are many situations that take countries forward and then backward, 3 steps forward, 1 step backward, so on and so forth. And that some of these arrangements are still not very deeply entrenched, and that they could change depending on the leaders and so on. But actually, for example, Somalia, which was considered a failed state, now has an elected parliament, and actually you can have commercial flight to Mogadishu, right? That's progress. Ghana is a country which is often upheld as a country now which has made a lot of progress in terms of knowing how to manage its oil revenues. Because we know in a lot of African countries, extractives, very rich, makes a country very rich, but it's mostly considered a curse because it's not managed well. But in Ghana, we see now how oil revenue is used for the public at large, that the transparency around its allocation is there, and so on. And I give these other examples: Liberia, which has democratic elections, which is now investing in public service and social infrastructure. Social infrastructure would be education, healthcare, for example. And there has been peaceful transfer of power in Malawi, Ghana, Nigeria. These are major progress also, but again, I cite this not because now this is said in concrete, because these things never are, but to give people a sense that the type of, we always have this attitude like, will we ever solve any problems? You never know, and I think the Holy Spirit does work too. So that we're not naive about the nature of the issues that we face in the world, I just want to give you a sense of the magnitude of the challenges. There's still a lot of very poor people in the world. About 20% of the world's population live under $1.25 per day. I used to not have any concept of how people live on $1 a day, like I couldn't even imagine it. But now most of my travels take me to places where people live on $1 a day, and I could tell you how. And the funny thing is that sometimes when I walk away from them, I don't feel like they're poor. I feel like that there's some basic things they need, like water, like a greater sense of security that comes from a better livelihood, that they could use better education. But believe it or not, even though they don't have a lot, I don't feel always that they are poor. We have a lot of hunger in the world, particularly relating to children. We have over 800 million people who will go to bed hungry today. And if you think about the children under 5, there's a lot of stunting, and stunting is not reversible after 2 years old. In many countries, I meet adults, they're 24, 25 years old, and their appearance is more like a 14-year-old. We know the relationship between poverty and violence. In fact, there are research studies that show that in countries where people's income is less than $3,000 a year, and $3,000 a year is approximately $10 a day. In countries which is less than $3,000 a year, people tend to go to war. And in countries where they make income of $6,000 a year per capita, they tend to be stabilized. Otherwise, the low-income country will go in and out of conflict. We see a lot of inequality in the world, and equality are both vertical, which means it's based on income, or horizontal, which means that it could be gender-based or tribal-based, ethnic-based, and so on. The inequality that we see, actually we're seeing it in countries which are developing in wealth, particularly in Latin America. As we see them growing in economic development, we actually see the lowest tier of that society get stuck. And that's actually not unusual. In Africa, we see some of that. The trend tells us that we will find the most number of poor people, defined as those living under $1.25 a day, in middle-income country. It used to be that we find poor people in poor countries. The trend is now moving towards poor people in middle-income countries. Clean water, we still have that issue. And also a topic that tends to intrigue a lot of college students is trafficking. Those numbers are hard to get. You could imagine that nobody gives you formal statistics on trafficked victims, but it's about 2 to 4 million per year. It's within country as well as across borders. Most people think about children, and particularly female, young girls, young women. Actually, there are also men who are trafficked. They're trafficked as forced labor, and actually there's older people who are trafficked because, again, they're trafficked as forced labor. These are some of the problems that we deal with. So I'm going to give you a sense of sort of how CRS addresses these issues. A lot of times people have in their mind that aid is like tossing bags of grains from the back of a truck. I think those are the most popular pictures. Actually, development and humanitarian relief is a very sophisticated operations. I want to give you an example, in this case, Haiti. Because again, people say, oh, things are never solved in Haiti, which is not true. Haiti has a lot of issues. The earthquake hit at a point when we say this patient has chronic illness, so on top of that, they have some big traumas. And there were over 1.5 million people who were in the camps. Now there's about 500,000. So if you want to drive around Haiti and see bad news, you can see that. But I want to show you some of the work that we do in Haiti because the Catholic Church in the U.S. was very generous. There was an outpour of money and generosity to help Haiti. An approach that we use is called integral human development, which means that we try to address problems in a holistic way. You know, hunger is not just giving people more food, but there's also the whole issue around, is hunger related to agricultural productivity? And what are the factors that drive agricultural productivity? Is it land rights? Is it title rights? Is it access to seeds? And how is the issue of hunger related to poverty, to literacy, to health? And so those are some of the things. So when we take on a problem now, we don't just try to solve the immediate need. That's what we do when we begin emergency relief, right? I mean, just like Pope Francis said, when you are in a field hospital in a war zone, you know, the first thing you solve is not diabetes, is you bound their wounds. But eventually, if the person recover from their wounds, then you have to deal with diabetes. And so we have now been doing this work for 70 years. We have a sense of sort of post-emergency. What are some of the things that we could do? So I just want to give you a sense, using Haiti as an example. You see, this is the destroyed cathedral on your upper left. What are we doing? Actually, part of the money which has been raised now is put in a fund which is managed by the Bishops' Conference together with the Haiti Bishops' Conference as a rebuilding fund with various proposals and a screening process and approval process. Meanwhile, our work is related to how do we bring people back to their neighborhoods and so on. So the first thing we did in the lower left is getting people into their own shelters and into their own neighborhoods. The shelters are not difficult to build. They're actually quite nice. They are 14 by 14. They have wooden walls, and they have metal roof, and they have a concrete base. Mechanically, it's very simple. But the problem is that how do you build when it is nothing but rubbles? And you can't even get big equipment to remove the rubbles. And there are no roads for those big equipment, and there's no dumping site. The second problem related to shelter is that there's no land title. Nobody owns land, and you could not actually find any documentation. So how do you resettle? In this case, we resettle about 1,300 in total families. So how do you put up a shelter when you have no access to titles? Another issue you deal with is that sometimes people don't want to leave the camp, as miserable as that is, because in the camp they know where food is coming from. The children are getting some type of education. When you return to a neighborhood, who will give you food? How will you make a living? And where will kids go to school? So you can see something as simple as moving people back to a neighborhood is just not simple at all. And so the picture next to it in the middle, you see Catholic school children. And what we did here is that about 25% of the children go to Catholic schools, and there's about over 2,000 Catholic schools. But a school is not a school is not a school. Some schools go for 3 grades, some schools have no books, some schools have no teachers, some schools have no roof. So what do? So instead of starting schools, or just rebuilding schools, we gave a grant to the University of Notre Dame, their Alliance for Catholic Education program, and this is a new project for them. And what they did is that they went into Haiti, And at our request, they went to every site of a school. There are multiple people going in. They use mobile device to take pictures, and they also downloaded a data form and fill in 75 pieces of data about each school, and now it's all done. Actually, it's been done for several months. So when you open up the map of Haiti, you could actually see the whole system of Catholic schools, and that allows the diocese actually to have a strategic plan in terms of how to improve the whole Catholic school system. There's individual fundraising for schools, but there's also taking on the whole system of teacher training, of parents training, inclusive education for children, and knowing what schools are operating. So you see it there. To its right is a picture of a hospital, and this hospital was completely destroyed. It only had the morgue and an outpatient clinic standing. This is actually an architectural drawing, and we're now in process. We will have we already broke ground. I think we'll have a dedication in spring of 2014. It's a multi-story hospital. It's not only just built, it's built back better. That's what we do. And also it's changing the business model of that hospital. It's a Catholic hospital. It will be turned into a teaching hospital. And so to do that, we connected the hospital staff to Notre Dame of Haiti. They will do nurses and doctors training. And we also connected this to the Catholic Health Association of the United States, which donated a good sum of money, but will also do a lot of the capacity development of this hospital. So it's a whole idea of not just building back, but building back better into a sustainable model. Because it's going to be a teaching hospital, it actually will have several wings, which are revenue generating. So they could actually designate several wings for wealthy people in Haiti, use that to generate the revenues that allow them to subsidize the care to the poor in that neighborhood. And up here in that farming picture, one of our projects is called From Mountain to Market. And here it deals with how to change the productivity of the farmers and, of course, the land that they cultivate. They grow mangoes and they grow coffee. They were not high quality, they were low quality. The quantity was inconsistent. Nobody uses them for any serious supply chain. And here is working with several thousand farmers actually to transform the way that they approach agriculture so that their products would have value. And finally, the upper center picture is about capacity building. So we work with a lot of the local people to train them in how do you manage these projects, because it's very labor intensive. How do you facilitate communities like the one which is the shelter coming back into life? Because in the end, we really want the local people to be successful and to own that project. So I just want to give you some sense of sort of how we now address problems. I just want to let you know that innovation, particularly for our students here, in universities, we talk a lot about innovations. Innovations is very important in our work. Why? Because now we have access to new technologies that we didn't have before. Think about the cell phone and what it would allow us to do. We have access for different ways of doing medicine. We have access to different ways of doing agriculture. In addition, the local people have a lot more expectations of us. And it's the whole idea that poor people don't deserve our second best. They deserve our very best. And our very best requires us to be innovative, to be creative, to really be good problem solvers, to not be satisfied with yesterday's solution, to not be satisfied with just good enough. And piety is not a substitute for excellence and for rigor. So we have actually innovation in mobile devices, how we do global health, how we're doing emergencies in the agricultural value chain. And I don't want to talk at you. I want to show you a video, actually two. But I introduced them. The first video that I want to show you is actually about our global health work. And that is about 10, 12 years ago. no, 10 years ago. President Bush had this big program for HIV/AIDS because that's a pandemic that was killing a lot of people. CRS had not done a lot of work in HIV/AIDS. There wasn't a lot of money to do HIV/AIDS or research or knowledge in terms of how to do that. But all of a sudden, resources were made available by the US government, and we formed a consortium. We led that consortium, and we won the grant for 10 countries, where our job was to administer care and medication to all of the HIV patients in these 10 countries. And HIV/AIDS is a complicated disease. And once you start someone on medication, you have to support them for the rest of their lives. Otherwise, they will die. In addition, how do you take the medication is not straightforward. How do you preserve the medication for people who live in rural areas? Take a lot of training. And also, in addition to that, is that anyone who is on HIV/AIDS medication, the ARTs, they require a doubling of the nutritional intake. And so it's not enough just to say we just dish out medicine. I want to show you a video of how we had to learn to solve problems along the way to make it done, to make it work. So I'm going to try to not run to Matt and try to do some of this myself and have this about a 5-minute video. Matt, oh, here it is. Very good.
They said it couldn't be done. Providing AIDS relief, that is. More than 34 million people worldwide are living with HIV, and almost 70% of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. But in the last decade, powerful new medications have made it possible for people infected with HIV to live long, healthy lives. These medicines are part of what's called antiretroviral therapy, or ART. At first, medicine was very expensive and was only available in wealthy countries. In poorer countries, only 7 out of every 100 people who needed medicine could get it. The United States set out to change that with the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, otherwise known as PEPFAR. PEPFAR made money available to provide medicine and other HIV care to poor people in developing countries. Catholic Relief Services and our partners created a program called AIDS Relief. In 2003, AIDS Relief received one of the largest PEPFAR grants to provide HIV care in 10 countries. Our goal was to provide treatment to as many people as possible as quickly as possible. They said it couldn't be done. They said there weren't enough doctors and nurses who knew how to treat HIV. So programs like AIDS Relief provided training to help medical providers become experts. They said it would be too difficult to deliver the medicines to people in villages in remote areas. So we helped build strong supply chains. They said rural villages are too far from hospitals and sick people couldn't get there. So we helped hospitals decentralize and create satellite clinics. They said many hospitals couldn't manage a complex health program. So we help provide strong organizations with good management, computerized records, and sound financial tracking. They said it would be too expensive to provide drugs to so many people. So we worked hard to keep costs low. They said people wouldn't understand how to take medicine properly. Our patients proved them wrong. Since the program began, AIDS Relief has provided more than 700,000 people with HIV care and treatment. That's enough people to fill Wrigley Field almost 17 times. AIDS Relief and PEPFAR proved that HIV treatment is possible anywhere in the world. And now we're turning it over to strong local organizations that will continue this life-saving work. They said it couldn't be done. What will we do next? For more information about this program and others, visit crs.org.
So I just want to say 2 things so you can see how complicated it is, even though it's animated. But out of this work, two very important strategic shifts came for us. The first thing is that we work with local organizations, as I told you earlier. And the second phase of PEPFAR, we knew it would be given to local organizations. The government already said it, that our job was not only to create the solutions, but is to build the capacity of local partners. And so in phase 2, in the 10 countries that we work in, the CRS partners won the grant to continue to work. So one of our very important priorities, strategic priority going forward, is this whole idea of local capacity building. How can you build up the capability, the professionalism, the administrative infrastructure, the skills, the knowledge of our local partners so that they could run their own operations, which is really their ambition. So that's one very important shift for us, to understand large scale, how do we pass on work to our local partners? And we're always, in some ways, I think, writing ourselves out of a job. The second thing that led to a new strategic shift is that all of a sudden we have an understanding, after all these 9 years of work, of what a health system is. Because in some of this delivery, there was no health system, just like how do you go from here to the most rural areas? What are the different elements which are needed in providing care and training at the different levels? What about in terms of the technical personnel, the medical personnel, but also the community structures which are needed? What about education and nutrition and so on? So because of this work, we began to have a sense of a health system. So in our next phase of our strategic work, instead of running health clinics, we are now going to work on the enhancement of complete health systems. What we found is that, of course, on the ground in developing countries, about 25 to 75% of healthcare is delivered by Catholic or Christian missionaries, right? Because the sisters of the priests and so on who left Ireland and France and so on 150 years ago, they went to Africa. And they're the ones who have built up the healthcare there. And meanwhile, in the United States, 40% of our care is also provided by Catholic Health. And in Germany, for example, it's the same thing. So all of a sudden, we realize that we're sitting in the middle of these really large, sophisticated, billion-dollar sort of Catholic health system. And meanwhile, there are all these Catholic health systems in these developing countries. And then we become the bridge, basically, between these systems and how you can use these systems to build the capability of these systems. And we're going to start with 10 different countries. We're working on our first one to really sort of put together the template of how do you move at the system level. So when we talk about innovation and writing ourselves out of a job, I mean, the next step is how do you really add value? If we are the United States with all of our most sophisticated and most talented people, like those of you who are sitting in the audience, how do we access, the best way to do things that have impact at a different level? So that's the health system work. My second of 2 videos on innovation relates to the use of what we call ICT 4D in the upper left. And that is information and communication technology for development. It's just a clever word, ICT 4D. And it's really about the use of mobile devices, cell phones, in development work. I'm trying to go to the next page. Okay, so let me just see if I could do this from current page. Don't try to read this, but what we want to show you is that across our different sectors of work, so you see agriculture, food security, health, emergency, microfinance, education, water, sanitation, peace building, these are the different sectors of work, and the different functions within those sectors when we do work, whether it is remote data collection, going down a row, lost my cursor here, whether it is remote data collection, building education awareness, literacy, communication and training, analysis, reporting, and tracking performance, and so on. In all of these steps across all of these sectors, we're now using cell phones. It's not totally complete coverage. We cover the whole picture, but there's different degrees of depth because we also have to train up our whole organization. CRS is known as a leader in the use of mobile devices in development. And so I just want to show you a video, another video, to illustrate that. And so, Matt has taught me so many times that you think I would know. Okay, great. Great.
Catholic Relief Services first turned to advanced technologies to improve our work because we wanted to be more accountable and transparent to our donors and to those we helped. Over time, we realized that information and communication technologies not only helped us operate more effectively, but they were empowering the people we serve to become more independent, self-sufficient, and successful. We've since used technological solutions in a wide range of projects, from teaching women to read in Niger to boosting farmers' production in Colombia. At the heart of our work is accessibility, the accessibility that communities have to mobile technology. 96% of all people worldwide have access to a mobile device. 89% are in the developing world, with 63% in Africa. Mobile phones have become more affordable and commonplace, even in remote rural areas. Put into the hands of the poorest and most vulnerable, they've become crucial to improving lives. Using a simple cellular telephone, farmers can now access the latest market information to help them get a fair price for their crops. Cash for Work recipients can receive funds through mobile banking, and pregnant women can be monitored by phone, as in this CRS project in Uttar Pradesh, India. Here, community health workers communicate vital messages to expectant mothers in an area that has one of the highest mortality rates of infants and women in childbirth.
It's so useful. There are some things that I didn't know about, and it helps me give the right advice. Thanks to the checklist, for the first time ever, I've been told what to eat and when to rest.
Since 2007, our ICT 4D programs have expanded and now cover all sectors and regions where we work. One of the primary factors driving us forward is the rapid rate of innovation. Every day, new applications of technology emerge, many from developing communities themselves, applications that improve their life and livelihoods. While information and communications technologies are revolutionizing the way people live, there is still much more to learn and share on how to use the technology in development work. CRS and its partners are committed to investing the necessary time and resources to build a future where technology is truly at the service of the poor. ICT 4D, empowering those we serve.
So I just want to say this ICT 4D is amazing. 6 years ago, when we did the first conference on the use of mobile devices in development, we had 40 people who attended that workshop. I think 30 are our own people. Last year, when we did it, I think in Uganda, we had close to 400 people when the capacity was 350 people. This year, we're actually beginning fundraising for our next conference, which is going to be in Nairobi. So a little nervous whether anybody would fund this, because after the Nairobi mall incident. But this gives you some sense of the power of technology. I think for most of you, you could imagine, for example, the greater accuracy, the efficiency. Now we don't do manual paperwork, and it allows your account to be really successful. It allows you to do different types of work. In addition, things such as accountability. You know, whatever we give out, and whoever is receiving it, the record is right there. I mean, we always kept those records, but they were manual. Now it is electronically collected. It is available almost instantly. That also allows us sometimes to deliver service from remote places. Some of the places we work in are very dangerous, and we don't want to send in armies of people if we don't have to send in armies of people. So that also allowed us to do some of our work, maybe from a contiguous country or contiguous province, but we could do it remote. And the final thing that people don't realize is that it gives our beneficiaries tremendous amount of power, because this device does not go one way, it goes both ways. So they could also give us evaluations as to whether we're serving them well. And that would be something that we would need to get used to. But it's good, it empowers them, so we would do that. I'm about to close, just so that you know where I am. So to close, I just have two overheads. I'm trying to get this full size. Okay, top button, okay. Yeah, so I just want to give you a sense going forward. You know, there's a lot of talk about the post-2015 development goals, and there are multiple goals. They're still not clear what they are, and there will be a lot of discussion and debate. But one of the things that we are hopeful about, we're not hopeful about everything, but is that there's now enough talk about poverty reduction that we need to continue to do that work. And added to that is the whole idea of peace building, that it is not enough just to do economic development in these countries, but we also need to attend to what are the factors that drive inequality, the factors that, how do we address youth unemployment? You could have economic growth and huge unemployment, for example. And so going forward, maybe the combination of poverty reduction and peace building. The new head of the World Bank is Jim Kim. He's been in his job about a year. He's actually a doctor. He's not an economist. Very interesting. He has set a goal for the World Bank that by 2030, which is about 16 years from now, that they will drop the percentage of poor people from 21% now to 3%. And so that's a very ambitious goal. And of course, we always remember why we do that. And here's Pope Francis, who told us that the church is equally aware of the responsibility that each one of us brings towards the world and to the whole of creation, that we must love and protect. And we can do a lot for the good of the less fortunate. We don't have to do everything. We just have to do our best and our part. For those who are weak and suffering, to promote justice, reconciliation, and to build peace. I just want to end before I show you a little prayerful video of Sarah's work, is to say that our work is very hard work. Our staff are often in situations where it is physically difficult, it is logistically challenging, politically sensitive, and with all of those things. But we consider our work a privilege. It is a privilege because one time when I was reading my daily Mass readings, and it was an Advent of last year, it was a Monday. It was a gospel reading about the paralytic who was lowered from the ceiling into Jesus' midst because he couldn't get in. And Jesus healed him, and he picked up his mat, and he walked away. And the very last line of that gospel reading was, "Today, something incredible has happened." And when I read that line, I thought, I see this every day, and not just one at a time. The work that is done in your name, help people recover from cholera rather than die from cholera. Help infants be born in health rather than with all sorts of issues. Help mothers deliver in safety. Help mothers not to have to sell their girls into prostitution. Help deaf children, like deaf boys. If a boy is deaf in Afghanistan, they're treated as a mule. They do the work of a mule. We work with people who would die from starvation. So every day it dawned on me that these are God's miracles, and that we get a little piece of that role in allowing God's miracle to work on earth and having a role in that. So it's a tremendous privilege. And as a privilege, we have to earn that privilege. So that's the line as CRS. Our work is a privilege, and we have to earn it. And the last thing I want to leave with you is a 3.5-minute meditation. It's called the Higher Gifts. I think it gives you a little bit of sense of CRS work and how grateful we are to do this work. And whenever the work gets hard for me, I actually watch this video myself. And right now, Matt, I don't know what I did with my videos. So I need you to come out and help me recover my videos. I think it's here. Oh, here it is. Great. So this is our ending, and we'll open up to your questions. So on behalf of the Catholics in the United States, this is the work. This video is called A Higher Gift and is available on our website. The lyrics is by St. Paul. Music is written by Steve Warner and performed by the choir of the Notre Dame Folk Choir. Thank you very much. I'm up here not so that you could applaud longer, but Matt told me I have to take questions.
Dr. Wu, thank you very much for that great presentation. Can you talk a little bit more about the role of corporations in the private sector and international development?
The role of the private sector like business. Actually, that's a very important role, and one of our new strategic priority too is we created a unit called the Cross-Sector Engagement Unit. As you know, we've done our work with the other nonprofits for a long time. That's a sector known to us. We've also worked with governments because a lot of times ministries are very important to our work. But the two new sectors for us are business and research universities. The reason for business is that, for example, our agriculture work that you saw, we've now worked with 80,000 farmers, bringing them to be engaged with the formal market, because otherwise they won't be sustainable. And so in order to engage with the market, you need businesses. So in fact, some of our work in Latin America, the counterparty to us is the local Walmart, where they're buying those products, Ben & Jerry, Green Mountain Coffee, and so on. So in the agriculture sector is particularly important. In a few weeks, we're actually waiting for approval from our partner. And this is a credit card foundation, which will be working with us to bring mobile money to 3 million people. We work with a lot of very poor people in saving circles. It's a long story, like community groups of about 20, 30 people, mostly women, and they pull together the little money that they have because we don't want them to borrow money. Sometimes their loans come at 12% interest rate a month. And so if they encounter any type of disaster, they could never pay back. So the whole idea is, how do you access the little capital that you have? So if you are with a group of 20 people, then every month you can borrow, if you put in $1, you can borrow $20. So we're built up now from that program 1 million people who have saved $10 million US over the last 7 years, and they've lent out all $10 million. It's invested, like in a chicken business or buy extra land and whatever it is. And so after this work, we're now working with a credit card foundation, which then will move into the credit card itself to do mobile banking. That's another example. We are actually exploring a new concept, a very new concept, with a conference in the Vatican in June 2014 on this topic called impact investing. And that is, how do we access private capital to fund projects which have both financial returns, social returns, and environmental returns. So business is very important to us, and then of course research universities. Anybody else? Oh, we need a microphone right there.
Dr. Wu, thank you for that excellent and inspiring presentation. You mentioned that Catholic Relief Services serves people around the world, the developing world, regardless of creed, and yet we're a Catholic-based organization. Can you talk to us about the interfaith bridges and perhaps bridges of tolerance or religious pluralism that are being built as a result of your efforts?
So a very, very good question. First of all, again, we are Catholic. We serve others who are not Catholic because God's love knows no boundaries. And I think Pope Benedict also put it very well and says love cannot have any conditions. So it's on that basis. So when the Catholics move into these countries, which are Muslim countries, for example, we really need to know how to handle ourselves. We don't want to come across as the Western Catholic Christian savior to sort of like make things right for you. And so, and the whole respect for the local community, and the first thing is that we have deep respect for the people we serve. We never think of them as in any way beholden to us or below us. We see them, we are the guests, they're the hosts. So how we could be of service is very important, and that respect translates into whatever faith they're in. The local Catholic Church, there are clearly issues where there are radical Islam and where the church and Christians are persecuted. But actually in a lot of situations, there's fairly harmonious, maybe sometimes tense, but overall workable relations between the Catholic Church and the other faith. And another principle of ours is to never mess up the local relationship for the church. Whatever the relationships they have with their local government and the other faith leaders and so on, we very much operate in such a way so that we don't compromise them in any of those. So oftentimes we access actually the good relationships between the local Catholic Church and the other faith leaders. A lot of the work that we do cannot be done without the participation of the elders in the communities. And those elders tend to be faith leaders. So work where we are building schools, for example, in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, for both boys and girls. So you could imagine the U.S. Catholics building schools for girls. I mean, you saw the story of Malala, I think, I forgot her name, the wonderful Pakistani teenager who was shot in the head for going to school. So for us to do schools, it's not building a building. Is how do you enter into community and be able to get the support of the elders to do that, and that's engaging the faith leaders. Something as simple as these water projects, engage the leaders. If we're going to change a practice or educate people about early child marriage, which sometimes is just child prostitution, or genital cutting, you really have to engage the elders. There has been work, interfaith harmony. So in situations where there are conflicts, so Kenya several years ago during the election, there was a lot of violence that was unexpected. Afterwards, the peace-building efforts is an interfaith faith-building effort. So learning how to sort of build bridges and work harmoniously for the good of the people is very much our work. In fact, sometimes the U.S. government come to us and say, does the Catholic Church in that part of the country have good relationships with the other faiths? So.
Thank you. It was a very inspiring presentation. Of all the people that you have working with your organization throughout the world, many of them, it's probably their first time away from home. Is there a training program you have to prepare a lot of these people for this mission?
Yeah, it's a very strict recruiting process. So for our young people who join us, this is the start of their career in international development. This is what we require. First of all, they have to have a master's degree. Not the specific discipline is not as important. You can have business, information technology, agriculture, international affairs, whatever the master's program. There's a broad range of relevant programs. The person must have had at least one, now preferably two, foreign languages. So if you know Spanish and French, that would be really wonderful. The person should have had 2 years of experience working overseas. So Peace Corps, for example, is very important, or Jesuit Volunteer Corps, Holy Cross Associates, and so on. But someone who's had 2 years, meaningful experience working in a developing country. And so usually they're about 26, 27 years old. The first year when we place them is a fellowship where actually they're not a permanent member of CRS yet, because that is the first year where we see them in operation. And so that's our recruiting process. As you can see, we look for a lot of prior experience. That first year is to see how they would operate in a place like Sudan or Congo, Afghanistan or Pakistan, Jordan, Lebanon, and so on. So that's our recruiting process. Oftentimes people say, do you use interns? My daughter would like to volunteer for 2 weeks. And you can tell in the way that we operate. We're not just digging wells or building an orphanage. The work that we do is very systemic. It plugs into the system, and it engages the local communities, and how we behave and how we work. It is very thoughtful. So we don't really use a lot of interns, although we are rethinking that, and perhaps there may be a sector of work, maybe in particular countries, that we may be able to have an internship program that could, say, for example, service about 10 interns a year. So we're rethinking that, but our recruitment process is extremely rigorous. We have about easily several hundred people who apply a year. There are a lot of young people nowadays who are very entranced by development work. Our difficulty, of course, is retaining people. At certain, when you're 27, it may be quite an adventure to go live in Rwanda and be a project manager. I mean, it's quite exciting. You learn so much. But by the time you're 32, married, you have your first child, what does that mean? Can you go to the Congo? When you're 42 and your parents are ill, should you be away? When you're 46 and your children need to go to college, what do you want to do? And so our issue really is this type of work and the life cycle of people, the family structure. What about the spouse? Does the spouse like this type of life? So that's where our challenges are.
It was an inspiring presentation. I'm in the back.
Okay.
Very last row. But I wondered if you could give us some advice for our current business students, and what do you think is needed next in business education?
I think the most important, very important message to get across to business student, in particular and all students, is that God is not real to them in their work world. And what you see is that, and I've been a business school dean forever, so I get these questions a lot, I give a lot of talks on this matter. And you see when students graduate from college, particularly after they've had a really excellent experience, they felt like they were in a school like Dominican, where the people loved them, the teachers cared, their classmates were gracious, and all of those things, they would say, I don't want to go into the real world. A lot of times when you do ethics talk, and I do a lot of those, and they're very wonderful, but you could actually hear the unspoken but screaming question, which is like, does she work in my world? Does she know the real world? Is she just an academic? Because in the world that I go to work, there's a lot of backstabbing. It's very transactional. I am nothing if not my numbers. It's only my numbers that matter. Profit is number one. What is she talking about? Because I've also seen a lot of businesses which done extraordinary good work, and they're sincere and authentic. But a lot of times when you do these talks and you let it peel a couple layers, there is this sense that the real world is not quite like God's world. God's world on Sunday, we go to church, we do our volunteer work, people play nice, people are gracious and generous, but we're not competing. My livelihood is not on the line. God is really gracious and God is there. But is God in the real world? I think that is such an issue. The more I talk and engage people, is that sometimes people say there's a divided world. There's this world where God is, there's this world where God is not. And lately, it's become sort of a very interesting, dimension that has come to my attention, is that if people don't believe God is in the real world, then where is God? And what is our faith? If we think that somehow God's grace and God's power does not penetrate the real world. And I don't know whether it says a lot about the world that people work in, or it says a lot about the people who are in that world, who we ourselves, do we take on the responsibility to act in such a way to believe that God is in the real world, because our behavior will trigger different types of reactions, could bring out different types of behavior. So I think actually, I could give you a lot of different answers. We should be globally oriented. We should be so on and so forth. But I think for a Catholic school, it's the whole idea of helping people somewhere along the line get a sense that, yeah, God is in the real world. In fact, that's the only world He is in, and He came into the real world. And that our work is very important, because in the end, in the Eucharist, God took our work. The bread and wine is the metaphoric and a collective work of our hands. It's our work. It's our work that He took to convert into His body and blood. So that's the joining of the human work and the divine. But it's this whole idea is people just feel like in this other world, well, I wish it to be God's world, but I'm sorry, it isn't. And are you naive at best? And should I not raise this question, because this Dean here certainly seems to be living in a very different world. I think that is the fundamental issue for believers. We're not talking about people who don't believe in God. We're talking about people who, quote unquote, believe in God, who just can't really sort of trust in that presence, in whatever that real world is. I think that is the challenge.
Thank you for your inspiring words, and also for the wonderful program that CRS has in terms of the fellowship. I chair a program on international development at DePaul University. Actually, some of our alumni enter CRS work through that program, so thank you for that. My question is really about the collaboration between CRS and Catholic universities in particular. What do you dream that we could do more to help a younger generation really to enter into a dedicated career for making the world a better place?
We actually now, we've had a pretty broad university engagement program. We're actually restructuring it so that it's not just broad, but impactful and sustainable. So in the past, we've had a lot of ad hoc and customized relationships between our 25 U.S. regional staff and about 200 universities, which means that we make a lot of relationships, but they're not sustainable. With Dominican, these are the three things we do. With Cardinal Stritch in Milwaukee, those are the four other things we do. With Marquette, we have 2 people and they like to do that. With this school, we have 1 student involved per year. With that school, we have 2 people involved a year. And so as a result, the relationships that we develop with universities and the services we provide, they're not very sustainable, because the faculty left, the staff left, the student left, our staff changed, that relationship is gone. We do believe we have a very important role to play, because just like I said, we started up our U.S. operations, and there are 3 divisions underneath them. One is that the field outreach. It's that we need U.S. Catholics to know that the gospel message is not just something that sounded nice. It's not a kind of a good-hearted idea, and that put it to work when you feel like it. We wanted our students and our church to know there are people who are working all the time, and it's extraordinary results. I mean, these are the harvests of God, We get to go and collect the harvest, which is the work that we do. We need the Catholics to know that, because I think that that's what's inspiring to them. It's a form of witness of the faith in action. And a lot of times we learn about our faith, we learn about the most important things from watching other people do it. It's not an intellectual concept. It's at the gut level, do you believe it's real? Do you believe it's honest? And so it is important, therefore, for us to take this work And while there is bad news in the church, we also have to acknowledge good news in the church. So we accept that responsibility, and our new way of approaching the universities is not completely new. It's we're going to use a structure which is more like a student organization chapter structure. I mean, all of you, when you were students, probably participated in some organization. I mean, think about Phi Beta Kappa. I mean, that's for academic honors. But there are service organization, Golden Key is another one, where the chapter structure actually allows it to be sustained year after year. There is a rhythm. You know, first of all, there's a faculty advisor, and even if that person leaves, there is a call for another faculty advisor. There are members who sign up to be part of this. There are officers who are elected every year, and then one crop graduate, the next crop of officers come in. There's proper training that we could provide, and people we could then connect with through a database. So we are rethinking, because there are 200 some Catholic universities. We also actually believe that we need to reach out also to campus ministries in secular universities. 85% of Catholics are there. And so we needed a structure that could be scalable and sustainable and administered with high quality. So that's what we're doing. And actually, our program now has 3 dimensions. One is student leadership development through our CRS ambassador program for students. There's a faculty and curricular dimension, which is developing resource and learning material and cases and technical experts that we could bring into the classroom through the internet. And then the third one is facing the administration, getting them to participate in some type of fair trade products. So we have the design, we have had a lot of experience, and now the key is really to structure it so that it is sustainable. One more, I saw a hand somewhere near there. There's that lady in the middle there.
I had a call a couple of years ago from a woman who said that she was brought to the U.S. by CRS, and that she was very grateful for assistance, and it included finding them a place to live, having her husband find a job, having her sons be able to go to colleges, all of which was done by CRS, but you mentioned they don't do anything in the U.S. So maybe, was she a fake?
No, no. So in the 1940s, when we first started, that's exactly the type of work that we did. We not only got people out of a country, we got people resettled into a country, such as the United States. Nowadays, a lot of that refugee work is actually undertaken in the U.S. by 2 Catholic groups. One is Catholic Charities, and the other is Migration and Refugee Services of the Conference of Catholic Bishops. So it's not that we abandoned that work, it's now there are agencies within this country and they receive grants in particular for resettling refugees.
But she would not have been helped by CRS.
If she was from the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, huh? 2 years ago, she was probably helped by the other agencies. They get us all confused because they don't really need to know whether CRS is the one who did this part but not this part. This whole thing is some people got them out, some people got them in. And we are part of the Bishops' Conference. MRS is also part of the Bishops' Conference. We work very closely together, and we also work very closely with Catholic Charities. So it is possible that people didn't make the distinction. Okay, I think Matt says that's the last question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'd like to thank all of you again for coming tonight, and I'd like to, just on a closing note, extend an invitation to future events, one of which is coming up very soon. This coming Saturday on our main campus in River Forest is our Entrepreneurs Boot Camp. Our keynote speaker will be Pat Ryan Jr., technology entrepreneur and social entrepreneur. This spring, date to be announced, will be our Brennan Forum on Corporate Governance. We'll email you. And I hope to see you at those and at the 10th Annual Ethics and Leadership Lecture next fall. Thank you for coming, and have a good evening.